What's up, nerds? Welcome back. Let's talk today about a story from Tom Taylor that's not absolutely terrible and is actually a pretty decent story. That story being Dark Knights of Steel #1. Alright, so as I mentioned, this particular story is actually written by Tom Taylor, who is currently in charge of the travesty that is the ongoing bisexual Superman saga, even though we've yet to see any of that actually be justified. But we're not talking about that story today. There will be many other videos discussing that particular series. Instead, we're going to talk about what we actually have in hand, and that being Dark Knights of Steel. Now, granted, I did not plan on buying this variant cover, but it was the last one they had at my local comic shop, and I'm not mad at it, because I actually really do like the art on this. It's pretty epic, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, so let's get into the story itself. So we start out with a very familiar setting. If you will remember, the planet Krypton, what happens to Krypton? It explodes. So that's what's going to happen here, where we see this is like when it first begins and Jor-El realizes like, oh shit, it's happening just like I said it would. So he goes over to Lara and is like, it's time, our son has only one chance. So you would assume, if you know the Superman story, you know what comes next, right? No, you don't. Because what ends up happening is, yes, there is a spaceship that crashes into a field on Earth. Yes, all of that remains the same. But what happens next is the pod opens and it's actually both Jor-El and his wife, because apparently I guess he watched Titanic. I guess it finally got beamed all the way out there at Krypton. He was like, oh yeah, the door is big enough for both of them. Maybe I can build a rocket ship bigger than just the size of a baby. Maybe that can be a thing. So he builds a pod for both of them. They land, and she's immediately like in labor as all the king's horses and all the king's men show up to see what happened. And so he's trying to tell them like, yo, it's okay, like we don't mean you any harm, please, my wife is in labor, like she needs help or whatever. But of course that falls on deaf ears, and as she's yelling like he's coming or whatever, they shoot arrows at them. And Jor-El finally kind of like has, that fight or flight response where he just kind of like freaks out, and because they're now on Earth, I guess just a couple of minutes was enough for him to absorb enough sunlight for him to immediately be able to like discharge a blast of heat ray from his eyes. So that's exactly what happens. He shoots out this gigantic blast from his eyes and ends up incinerating everyone and every animal, which unfortunately includes all of the horses. He kills all of them, and then he turns around to see she's given birth, which was pretty damn quick. I'm assuming it's because she also had enough sunlight to actually, not only not feel that much of the pain, but to just like get the baby out in one push. Because I mean, this was about a split second, and everything that I know of women being in labor, yeah, it doesn't happen that fast. You know what I mean? Anyway, so she pushes the baby out, and then she's asking like Jor-El like what happened. And he's like, it's all right, everything is going to be all right. As we can see, just the decimated remains of what were all of those knights and horses and everything. Anyway, we go from there over to the Kingdom of Storms, into this little like hovel, this little shack or whatever the hell, and we see on the floor a young blonde boy who goes by the name of Constantine. Yes. And he's just there like rambling shit as this other guy is transcribing everything that he's saying. And the king is basically just telling him like, go ahead, keep recording everything he says. And we see that it's actually, if you can kind of tell by the motif of the way that he looks, it's actually Jefferson Pierce, who's Black Lightning. But here he's just known as King Jefferson. So anyway, he's telling him, like, go ahead and keep writing everything the kid's saying. And so he's saying, they have stepped onto our world from theirs. The green man waits fire and blood. Gods are born and gods are killed. Castles crumble, people tear as easily as parchment. Swifter than a crossbow bolt. And then it says, more powerful than castle walls, soaring over moats and fortifications. Look, up in the sky. And he doesn't get to finish that because all of a sudden he like sits up, and Jefferson asks him like, what's going on? What do you see, Constantine? And he just like looks at him and very bluntly says, our fucking end. So that's where that actually ends. And as we can see from the little caption or whatever, the scribe chose not to write the expletive. Instead, he just put our end. So he tried to make it a little bit more PG, I guess. A lot more than I'm willing to do. Anyway, so we go 19 years later to the castle of El, because of course, now they're in charge and shit. So we can see where young Clark Kent, young Superman, Superboy, whatever. He's here and he's like coming up to Bruce, yes, Bruce Wayne, who is about to go off on like some adventure or whatever. And he's telling him like, yo, I really want to come with you. And Bruce is telling him like, no, not going to happen. And of course, the other one behind him is Alfred, of course. So he's just kind of trying to tell, like, it'll be okay. Like, you rely on children, but you won't have me at your side. You think me incapable, and he's just telling him, like, you're practically a god. So that's not the problem. It's that your parents don't want me to go. And Alfred is telling him, like, you can shoot fire from your face, my lord, because he tried to say, I'm not a god. Anyway, he's like, yes, thank you, Alfred, I've noticed. And he's saying, well, Bruce is telling him, like, I know you're capable. I have sworn to protect your family from the one thing that can harm you. I go to confront a banshee's magic. I will not lead you into danger, which I thought was a pretty interesting type of convention to put into this comic book, because one of Superman's lesser known weaknesses is to magic. Not very many people know that, but people are starting to catch on to that more and more lately, because it's like whenever new writers find out about like some weakness that maybe most people don't know about, they start exploiting the hell out of that. So here's where we have that particular thing where we're basically playing up that part. But like I said, it does make sense, and especially when you put it in a high fantasy setting like this, it makes it even better. So he's saying like, are you immune to magic? Are you not in danger? And of course Bruce just looks at him like, shut up. So he says, stay here, please, my lord. And then Alfred kind of explains to him, like, yeah, you know that look he just gave you? That's the look that he gives people whenever he knows he just lost the argument. So they ride off, and then they go to where it is they're going to find the Banshee. And he comes across two of his Robins. Yes, Sir Richard, or Squire Richard, and then also Duke. So normally Nightwing and the Signal. He comes up and they're kind of telling him, like, you know, the Robins are evacuating the other people. We track the Banshee to the Pullman. So Alfred's telling him, like, I'll guard the gates in case she gets away from you. And he's just saying, yeah, she won't. So he goes over to, like, the little tavern or wherever where she's staying. And then they're kind of, like, dragging out the innkeeper and everything. And then we also see, I think that's what, Stephanie? Yeah, Stephanie's also there, and he says, from now on, Stephanie does all the reasoning. An alarming amount of your attempts at diplomacy end with someone comatose. Because he was talking to Jason Todd, so of course, you know, a lot of the people he talks to end up, you know, just knocked out. Anyway, so Stephanie's saying, like, the inn's empty aside from the Banshee. She's in the third room in the back on the bottom floor. Doors bolted from the inside. She's alone. So he's like, all right, yeah, y'all have done a good job. Now I'm going to go in. So he manages, of course, to get his way in without waking her up. And then he puts his sword to her face and is like, your time is up or whatever, like, you're coming with us. He says, get up, Banshee, slowly. So she's saying, like, the door was bolted. How did you even get in? He's like, do you know who I am? So she says, yes, you're the bastard Bat Prince. So back then, it wasn't really so much of an insult to call someone a bastard. It just kind of had the classical meaning, someone who grew up without a father. Anyway, so he says, then you know not to attempt to flee. Are you an assassin sent by King Jefferson? She says, I have no wish to harm the elves, no matter how much harm they wish upon me. But he says, magic and your kind are outlawed in the kingdom. You have violated the law by being here. You will be imprisoned, Banshee. You will not be mistreated if you come peacefully and quietly. So this is where she says, my name is Dinah. And as for quietly, and so if you know anything about superhero names, Dinah should tell you exactly what's about to happen. Yes, it's Black Canary, and she immediately uses her sonic scream on him. And so we can kind of see him there just kind of like trying to cover his ears and shit through the helmet, which is never that smart of an idea. Anyway, so she stops, and she sees that he's still alive, and she's asking, like, how are you still alive? That shouldn't be possible. And he's saying, like, yeah, I don't know either. So she tries it again at a closer range, even louder, right there in front of him, when all of a sudden a hand flies in and just, like, covers her mouth. And, of course, it's Clark. So he's kind of telling her, like, you don't look like a monster. You just look scared. So this is where, like, Bruce comes up and, like, hits her on the back of the head with the butt of his sword and everything, and that knocks her out. So Clark asks him, like, was that really necessary? And he says, you're not supposed to be here, of course, because he was supposed to have stayed back there. But he says, we should probably find a way to gag the Banshee. And he's like, yeah, of course. So he's asking him, like, are you all right? And he says, yes, I'm fine. And then Clark tells him, like, well, the blood that's, like, protruding from your face kind of begs to differ. So he tells him again, I'm fine. And he's like, sure. Stoicism is a well-known treatment for brain injury. So he just tells him, like, bring her. She belongs in the L dungeons with the others. So they get back to the kingdom of L and everything. And we can see, yes, this is Harley Quinn coming out to greet them. And then she's kind of like telling Bruce, like, if you were trying to make a centaur, putting the girl on the back is kind of the wrong way to go about it or whatever. But he tells her, do not torment me today, Quinn. But she's like, but you're so much more fun to torment. Or yeah, you're so much fun to torment. She's like, and it's so easy. You're so dark and brooding, but with the little ears, and she like hits his helmet and shit. So Clark comes up and says like, leave him alone. And then they're saying, or yeah, it's like, all right, but only because you're both in enough trouble. Your parents would like to see you would like to see you, Cal. So of course they come up and they're asking Bruce at first, like, why did you take him with you? And of course he's telling them like, well, I didn't. I'm sorry. He shouldn't have been there and everything. He says it was an error in judgment. And of course Clark is like, don't lie for me. He didn't take me. I wanted to go, so I went of my own accord. So they're like, I see. And then the mom says, Cal, we want to protect you. To which he says, and I will not stand by while Bruce and his Robins risk their lives to protect us, not when axes break on my skin. So Jor-El asks Bruce, like, did you find the Banshee or whatever? And he says, yeah, she's in the dungeon with the others. She has been muzzled. So he's like, you believe she was coming for us? So Clark tries to tell him she wasn't coming for us. We came for her. But Bruce says, my Robin in Jefferson's court learned a magical assassin had been sent. So Clark is trying to say, like, that doesn't mean it was her. Just because we know that was something that was happening and she has a power, that doesn't mean she was the one coming for us. So he's saying, like, you talk about everything good we've brought to this world, yet we're locking away innocence. And this is where Bruce tries to argue, like, they're not innocent, they're magic. So, of course, Jor-El's telling him, like, look, we're the last of our kind, so we kind of have to be, very protective, and I'm going to do whatever I have to do to protect you and your mother. So Bruce tells him, and I will continue to do all I can to protect you, my king and queen. But Lara goes over and tells him, Bruce, for the last time, your parents were our monarchs and our friends. This is as much your home as ours, and you do not kneel in it. So Jor-El's telling him, like, if I had my way, you would be the one sitting on the throne. You would be the one who is king. And then Bruce tells him, well, they see you as a god, and I'm a bastard. So Clark is like, who cares about that? But he tells him the entire kingdom, the kingdom I serve. Our traditions do not stop at the whim of a smiling spaceman, to which Clark says, your traditions are the most backward, idiotic, but Jor-El cuts him off and is like, all right, that's enough. Bruce, take a walk with me. So they go outside and we can see where there's like lightning striking and then thunder crashing. So of course Bruce kind of looks back like, what is that? Is it just the storm? And Jor-El tries to tell him, like, it's just thunder. It's thunder and lightning. You don't need to be afraid of that. But Bruce tells him, like, no, I have every reason to be afraid of it, because if you remember Black Lightning's powers. So he's telling him, like, no, I have every reason to be afraid, and so should you. So he's asking, like, what's the matter? Like, you seem more agitated than usual, Bruce. Is something going on? And he tries to tell him, like, I'm afraid, my lord. I haven't wanted to say anything. Today I stood in the path of destruction. Wood turned to splinters and stone cracked around me. I should have been killed, torn apart, yet I live. It is not the first time I haven't survived an encounter like this. I have sworn to protect you from magic, but the Green Man, when he attacked, I can do things. I have come to suspect there is dark magic within me. I should be banished to protect you, or locked away. I believe I am cursed. And that's where we go over to Hob Forest and we see Green Arrow who's there. And of course, I don't know that for sure that this is Green Lantern that he's like there with. Because he's basically saying, like, this makes me uneasy. It feels cowardly, dishonorable. And then the figure is saying, like, the ring spoke to me, Oliver. This is how the world is saved. He's asking him, like, are you sure this is going to work? He says, it will make the distance. The magic will do the rest. Only your aim is in question, because he's like imbuing one of his arrowheads. And this is why I'm saying I'm not sure it's Green Lantern. Because if you look at the ring, yes, I get it. This is an alternate universe and it's in a high fantasy type of thing. So maybe the shape of the ring would be different. But this design reminds me more of the power ring symbol, you know what I mean? Or the power ring like shape of the ring and shit. So that's why I'm saying, and especially since what he's about to do doesn't really seem like the type of thing that, Green Lantern would do. But I could be wrong. We'll see what ends up happening. Anyway, so Green Arrow tells him, like, it's my aim isn't a concern, Green Man, and he takes the shot or whatever. So this is where we see Jor-El finally kind of like comes out to Bruce and tells him, like, yeah, here's the thing. I know that you've always felt very protective of us and everything. And he says, you have more reason to hate magic than most, but you are not cursed. I'm sorry you believe this, and I'm sorry you carried this guilt as I hid my own. And he's saying, like, you knew yourself to be a bastard or whatever. That was never hidden from you or the kingdom. Thomas and Martha had too much misplaced honor for that. Your mother and I, and he just like kind of stops, and he's like, you were a mistake. Not that you personally are a mistake, but what your mother and I did was a mistake. So now you should already understand exactly what's going on. And that's where he tells him, you are my son, Bruce. He says, it's why I so strongly believe you should sit on the throne. 2 kings have loved you. And all of a sudden, I'm not going to lie, when I saw this part, it may be kind of fucked up, but I started laughing because he immediately gets shot in the eye. Like, can you imagine just talking to someone and all of a sudden an arrow just like straight into the eye and you're just like, oh shit, what the hell? Like as the body starts to fall or whatever. So yeah, he falls down and dies, and then the last thing we see, because this is where the issue ends, the last thing we see is Bruce kneeling there, and yes, you can see his eyes are glowing red. So he has that half Kryptonian DNA or whatever. So that should be pretty interesting to see how that plays out. Overall, I actually do like this story. I'm more prone to enjoying stories that are kind of set in like a sort of medieval-ish setting, like I said, high fantasy type of thing. I've always been into that, like, knights and dungeons and castles and wizards and shit like that. That's always been my type of thing. So that's why I was willing to pick this up, even though it's written by Tom Taylor, and I do not like his current take on Superman. But this particular story just goes to show us what happens when he's trying to just write a story. You know what I mean? Not trying to write a story that's going to get the attention of like major newspapers and news networks. Now, when he's just trying to write a good story, he actually does an okay job. Like, I'm actually engrossed. I'm not going to say that this is my favorite story of all time or that I'm super geeked to see where it goes, because the fact that this is a 12-issue limited series, I mean, this could very definitely end up taking like a left turn and just turn into complete crap. But at least for this first issue, it's actually really good. It's very entertaining. I like the setup. And I even like that whole thing of like him telling Bruce, like, well, you're actually a half Kryptonian. That I did not see coming. So it should be kind of interesting to see how that's going to play out, how his powers kind of manifest, as like I said, as we saw, at the very end, his eyes started to glow red. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what powers he has, because he obviously, at least as far as we know, he's not able to like move super fast yet, and he's not able to fly just yet. So we'll see what else kind of develops from this. But yeah, overall, I think it's going to be pretty good. I'm hoping it's going to be pretty good. At least the first issue has me somewhat believing that. But like I said, I'm way past the point of actually just having hopes for this. At this point, I'm more just like, well, I'm going to keep reading it and see what happens. If I'm pleasantly surprised by the very end of it, then hey, cool. At least they achieved what they were trying to achieve, which is always something to celebrate. But we'll see what happens from it. I don't know if anybody out there has read this, though. If so, do feel free to share your comments with me down below. If you haven't read it, do feel free to share your thoughts with me on just what you've heard about it so far. Does it sound like something that you would get into, or is it the type of thing you'll just wait for the trade? I know some people do that. Nothing wrong with that as well. So yeah, feel free to share your thoughts with me down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely make sure to like the video, subscribe, and make sure you're subscribed, and make sure you have the notification bell hit, so that way you know whenever I post a new video or I'm going live or whatever, you want to be kept up with that information. So make sure you hit that bell. And then if you're done here, then go and read a book. And if not, then I'll see you on my next video.